Hi
Hi.
everyone, my name is Pam Le Noury. I am Head of Expedition Operations at Noble Caledonia, and I'm also on the PTGA Advisory Board since the beginning of PTGA. It's a super privilege to be able to share a passion, our shared passion with all of you, chatting about something we all love and enjoy and miss dearly, which is Zodiac, tricky situations, avoid and conquer. And joining me, the only person who's had more accidents and eaten more humble pie than me. Over to you, Alex.
Hi, thanks, Pam. I'm Alex Cowan. I'm an expedition leader, been specializing in polar regions for almost 10 years, and I'm also on the board of directors of PTGA. So very happy to be here talking with Pam about something we're both very experienced in, which is tricky situations in Zodiacs.
Okay, so a couple of housekeepings. So if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat box as we go along. And Lauren in the background, who I want to give a huge big thanks to for being the technical wizard of all of this, she will help pop it on the screen or let us know if there's any questions. Also, probably your Facebook is going to do auto caption, so it's going to try and tell you what we're saying, but because of Alex's weird accent, it's probably going to get it all wrong, so you can turn those auto captions off. And then if the live stream ends prematurely, just give it like 30 seconds and then refresh the group page and then look for the live view at the top, and you should come back to where we were. So guys, the guiding principle of this talk, getting yourself, it's something we all think about and dread and talk about at the bar so much, I guess, and gain so much from chatting about these stories with each other. But the guiding principle that we really want to talk about is observing, always looking, always being vigilant, always being, I guess, a bit defensive and looking out for those things. So we really don't want to talk too much about what to do when you get into these tricky situations, which of course we will, but rather to avoid getting into those tricky situations in the first place. And you can't overstate or overdo the observation, getting all your stuff checked out and looked at. And then the other big thing is, and it was really hard when I was a new skipper 20 years ago and I was young and inexperienced, and it was this idea that someone else can tell you when to go and when not to go. And it's so helpful to tap into the experience of a team and all talk about, what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and how you're going to play it and what do you think, and, this bay is going to produce for us and this wind and this swell and this weather. But you, at the end of the day, really need to decide for yourself when it's a tricky conditions, marginal conditions, whether or not you're going to go. There's no boss or EL or someone else that should make that call for you. You should decide, because you, if you were to have an incident, are going to write the report and explain why you did what you did, and maybe even end up sitting in a court of law one day. And so you should think about that when you decide to go, when you feel that, okay, the ELs decided we're going to do this operation. I was on the driving roster. Maybe I want to stand down, or maybe, I want to think about myself because I don't feel that was the right decision and I don't really want to drive in these conditions. So that's pretty brave to do that. And that's why the discussion in the team is so valuable, but still you must make the choice for yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, we're always planning for the best, whether you're the EL or a driver or leading a walk, you're always planning for the best, but you've also got to mentally and physically prepare yourself for the worst as well all the time. And this idea that you're always thinking about, sitting in court one day can be a really good way of getting yourself to make good decisions. So the quote, what would the coroner say, is something that's always in my head when I'm planning an operation. I'm always asking myself, how will I defend this decision in court? No matter how easy the conditions. I'm imagining some expert witness who maybe is someone who went to Antarctica on holiday 10 years ago, talking about what isn't appropriate. That, how can I defend my decisions at any time? Like, am I making a good decision or a convenient decision? And this all feeds as well into reporting as well, which is something I think we'll have some time to talk about as well.
And Alex, I think you mentioned it to me before, but it's like not just what would the coroner say, but it's like what would your peers sitting around at the bar in Tantissara or whatever, like what would they say? You captioned in that one perfect.
Yeah, I'm thinking that all the time. Like, somebody standing at the bar in the Dublin saying, "Did you hear about that idiot Alex Cowan who went out in 60 knots at St Andrews and came unstuck? Like, what did he expect to happen?"
Yeah, so the peer pressure can work both ways. It's a good regulator as well, if you think like what all the rest of the industry say. Yeah. And the other quote that I really like by Eleanor Roosevelt, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. I'm someone who likes to, it's easier for me to sort of snuffle around and make a few mistakes. And I kind of learn better, like a lot of people, by making some mistakes. But we just literally have to take the very few very bad incidences that have happened in our industry, thankfully, and we all have to dissect them and learn from each other. And that's the best part of our industry, is all sharing those horror stories, the few that we have, and all learning from each other. So that's a really good quote as well, I think. Okay, so to start off with, we wanted to talk about planning, spotting, anticipating, like not getting into a crap situation in the first place. So getting as much knowledge onto into the situation as possible. And like I said, it's whether you're a driver or whether you're an EL, often the bulk of the time spent on this falls to the EL. But the more information you have at your fingertips to help make those decisions for yourself and to back up the EL, to give the EL the support to say, oh yeah, well, I checked the weather app too, and I'm just worried about that wind. It's really, really, it's such a good habit to get into. So Alex and I did a little survey of our best resources of information we can grab, and we have a couple of top tips here for you that I'm going to share. And one is, a key one that I'm going to share a little video with you now is weather. So there's loads of weather resources out there. A lot of the ships have a very good weather system, weather programs that they subscribe to. But if you want to get hold of your own one or two, the top ones that we both agree are worth looking for is Windy. So there's two Windies. There's the red Windy and then the blue Windy, and I'm going to show them both to you now. So the red Windy is like a red little icon like that. Gives you the best, for me, it's the best synoptic chart. So it's one thing to have a spot forecast, but to sort of know what the bigger picture of the weather is going on in the area is the best thing. So the weather at the site you're at doesn't always follow the forecast that you expect, but if you know what system is around, what bigger wind and swell systems are around, then when the weather doesn't come true, you kind of you know why. This is now the blue Windy. It also gives a really nice synoptic chart, but the red Windy is, for me, the best visualization of synoptic charts. And then it gives you the spot forecast. And on the spot forecast of this particular Windy, it'll give you the wind, the swell, and the energy of the swell as well, a little visualization of where the wind's coming from on the map. It also gives you the sunrise and the sunset, and gives you the tides as well. And packing that all into one little screen grab is super, super helpful. So these are the two, even at home every day before I go out on the boat here, these are the two that I'll always check them. I go to. Then the tides, there's the MRA charts, and then this one is world tides, and you buy it each year. And you can zoom into any spot in the whole world, look for the nearest tide thingamajiggy, tide station. You get your sunrise, sunset, your high tide, your low tide, like this. But you'll also get, and this is the best part, a graph where you can literally run through a whole week or far into the future or in the past for reporting and stuff. And you can see exactly the level of the tide at a particular time. And this is so helpful because there are places in the world where, first of all high tides are not the same. So a spring high tide during full moon could be a meter or more higher than a neap high tide. So it's not good enough to just always say, oh, well, it's high tide. Last time high tide was fine. It could be a meter or more difference from one high tide to the next. And it's really great. There's some place in the world that we go to where it's only accessible once the water reaches 1.2 meters. And so you can scroll through that thing and know exactly at 1.2 meters, oh, this reef starts getting exposed and waves can start breaking over that reef. And then also the peak flow is going to cause big currents. So really knowing how that tide is going to interact with the charts and the weather where you're at, and the spring tide versus the neap tide, really having a good handle on those tides has been one of the biggest assets to me, as you know, playing around in boats and kayaks and everything else for the last 20 years. So there we go.
It really helps to know what the tide's going to do, and in terms of affecting what's going to happen to your beach in a lot of places as well. So, you know, for example, St. Andrews, it can be a lot easier at a high tide than a low tide. As the low tide drops, I found often you can get trapped on this long, low angled flat, and then the waves will just break into your boat at the bottom. And then also just understanding what the tide is doing, you know, just offshore. Like it's intuitive to think that tide will move brash away from a beach. But for example, at Nico, when the tide is going out at Nico, it's ebbing out of all of Anved Bay, and Nico becomes a back eddy, which means that any ice that falls off the glacier is dragged straight to the beach by that tidal flow. So it's really worth just observing all the time. So all the time, just looking at the tides, even if you think it doesn't really matter what the height of tide is, by just looking at it and then seeing how your operational area is changing as that tide rises and falls, you can learn a lot about it.
And recognizing that you've got a full moon, so you've got a spring tide, you've got a peak flow at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and you've also got a wind happening, and you've got a narrow channel, and you put all those factors together, and you're like, wow, we could really end up with a, you know, wind over current, big surf jacking up in that channel that we're going to be. It's something I need to have in my radar, and then look at that defensively the next day before you just commit to operating. And, you know, at the high or the low tide, it might be a doddle, but then at the peak flow between the tides, you suddenly have this ripper of a current running between the islands. So that goes on to the next app that we really suggest, which is iSailor. Knowing the charts, and you've also got so many great resources from IATO and IECO of the maps. So those ones are really great, all the guidebooks there. You've got the charts in the bridge, and you've got other staff experience to tap into. But iSailor, where you would subscribe to the actual chart of a particular area, but it really does give you great detailed maritime charts to go and look at. So just zoomed in here on, like, say, one of the ones that we'd be familiar with. I zoomed in on Half Moon Island in a sec here. And you can see it gives you really good overlay of the bay, the depths, and it's also just to visualize which way it's facing. So now you know the wind's going to be doing such and such, and you know the bay is facing eastwards, and therefore will it funnel in or will it be sheltered? You can check your distances, say if you're going to kayak around or send the kayakers all around, and you can even like plot a course from A to B if you think, okay, well, let's take the Zodiacs across to the next island, or let's not. This iSailor is such a great little handy tool for every driver to have. You don't really use it while you're driving the Zodiacs, but I use it constantly in the planning stages.
Yeah, and a few other things that are worth thinking about. We don't have apps for them, but things you should always be thinking about in terms of spotting and avoiding and mitigating risks is carvings. So we know, we all know certain places in Svalbard and also in Antarctica, places like Nico Harbor. There are places we are very familiar with, which we know there are going to be carvings. But you can also try to guess maybe from charts. And when you're looking at charts, it's really valuable to look to see if there are very shallow areas near glaciers as well. If you're out in deep water and there's a carving, usually it's fine. But, if you are in very shallow water and there's a carving and suddenly the sea floor starts to appear all around the Zodiacs, that's a pretty worrying situation to be in. And you just need to observe as well. If you turn up somewhere and you're seeing the glacier shedding all the time, you can expect some big carvings. And I've noticed it tends to happen more on hot, sunny days. Like I particularly noticed that in Svalbard. On a hot, sunny day, you see a lot more carvings. Also currents. So if you know there are narrow channels where you are, and Pam mentioned that when you're mid-tide is usually when your peak flow is. But again, that's not always the case. So like a classic example of that is Hellisundit in Svalbard, where mid-tide there's zero flow, and then high tide there's peak flow. So it's, you know, learning these things as you go along. And thinking about ice in that current in particular, if you haven't been trapped in ice in a Zodiac in a current, it's hard to imagine just how powerful it is. So you can crush Zodiacs. Often it will pop Zodiacs out of the water, so they're sitting on top of the ice, and it can be quite unpredictable as well. So thinking about currents and also where ice is, and also you need to think about the experience of your team. So if you're thinking you're going to be faced with some situations like strong winds or strong currents, do you have a team that can manage that? Or do you have a team where you need to maybe rein in your ambitions a little bit?
And then because we're going to places that are quite sparse, tapping into the veterans of the team, the charts might really be unhelpful. Maybe most of the team has never been there. Maybe the weather forecast seems fine, but you've got one of those like golden veterans on the team. You've got to tap into that experience of your team members. Oh, one time we're here with catabatics. You know, there might be no other reason for you to believe that this is a place that produces catabatic winds apart from this guy saying it. And then it's in your radar. And then having said that, it also works both ways. We often get so complacent because, oh my gosh, I've been to Couvierville a million times, nothing's ever gone wrong here. Or every time we're at Nico, there's carving and a wave on the beach. And so you always apply that heuristics to your situation. So don't be complacent just because nothing's ever gone wrong here. Always be a little bit defensive and always do that full kind of check of the weather. Oh, we've had 5 days of glorious weather. I just stopped even checking, the forecast. Keep the practice alive, keep checking the weather, even if it's been amazing for like 5 weeks in a row. That never happens, but and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and a way I try to get myself to do that is asking that "what would the coroner say" question again. Because if they say, "Why didn't you think this would happen?" and you say, "Well, it never happened before," like no one's going to accept that. It's a terrible answer. Like you've got to have a real answer to that. So you should be making risk assessments all the time. So when you're turning up somewhere, you're making that risk assessment from the bridge, and you can't assess everything, but you just assess what you can. And then you're going to do it again from either the gangway or marina deck. Like, what are the risks specifically associated with that? On the drive in, you're risk assessing again. As you arrive at the landing and all the way through the landing, you're constantly changing your risk assessment. And you need to be kind of just noting that in your head all the time in preparation to potentially have to write it down later.
Okay, so this risk assessment for most of us has been going on in our heads for all these years. But in the last couple of years, a lot of companies and even IECO has sort of formalized this risk assessment process into an OVRAT, an off-vessel risk assessment tool. So IECO's got an app that does this. And this is an example of the one that we use at Noble that Jane Wilson developed for us. And it's really, really great because on the one hand, yes, paperwork is a bit of a hassle, but now you've got this piece of paper that reminds you of the risks that you could be going through, and you just whiz through it. And then you've got this piece of paper backing up your decision to cancel or backing up your decision to proceed. And it sort of makes you just feel that little bit more confident that you've done your due diligence. So how these risk assessments generally work is you take the probability of something happening and you multiply it by the impact, and everything's a score of just 1, 2, or 3. So, for example, okay, the weather's looking pretty bad. Like we've got, 20 knots of wind. So the probability of bad weather is a 3, 1, 2, or 3. It's pretty bad. But what's the impact of that bad weather? On the first row, I just said, well, it's a 1. I mean, everyone's got their foul weather gear. We're prepared for this. We came down here, we're totally ready for bad weather. Fine, 3 times 1. That is an okay risk to go ahead. But if we move down the list a little bit, okay, the gangway's really lousy, the ship is absolutely lurching, the captain doesn't want to go deeper into the bay where it's sheltered, so we're just basically wide out in the open here. So the probability of having, let's say, a man overboard happen at the gangway, because it's so rough, the interface between the Zodiac and the ship is so bad, the probability is high. It's a 3. And what's the impact of someone falling in the water? Well, the impact's pretty high too, because now you've got a person in the water next to a big, heavy ship with a moving gangway, and it's freezing cold. So 3 by 3, 9. Now you've got a red herring here, you've got a red flag, be like, hang on, I really shouldn't go ahead. If I've got 1 9, I want to try and mitigate it. If you've got a couple of 9s going through all the other risks of then the landing and the catabatics and whatever else you could have happen ashore, dragons and all that. So once you've got a couple of 3 by 3s, you got several 9s, okay, like you can't just mitigate everything. But if you just had 1 3 by 3, maybe you could mitigate that a little bit. Maybe you could say, oh, like, could we move into the bay? Could we move around to the next bay? And if we move on to the next bay, we get a lot more shelter. Suddenly, that probability drops down to a 2 or a 1. Then it's totally acceptable for us to use this gangway and disembark. Let's look at the next thing. Can we mitigate that? So this helps you to say to the passengers, look, we simply can't go ahead. We cancelled because we can't go ahead with this amount of risk. The probability of someone falling in water was too high. But if you went around into the next bay and you went ahead, but you still had an incident, you could say, well, we felt that it was too risky there, but we came around here and we felt like we mitigated it. So you kind of always sort of work in your favor if you make good decisions based on it, either which way.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention here that you shouldn't let time pressure cause you to lapse on this risk assessment either. Like, especially, if you've chosen to go out relatively late, maybe, you don't want to make the operation too long, or you want to have a rest before you go out. That can be very difficult then when you go out, discover a risk you hadn't seen before, and now maybe you've got a split landing and the landing is going to take a minimum amount of time. You're under a lot of time pressure suddenly, and you just have to be so careful not to let that time pressure either stop you from doing a risk assessment or stop you from mitigating against it. So my recommendation is always leave yourself more time than you think. I'd rather be twiddling my thumbs for 20 minutes than to suddenly not have time to do the operation because I don't have time to mitigate the risks that we've uncovered as we've landed.
All right, so let's talk about there's so many mitigations according to there's so many risks that are out there, and there's so many ways that you can say, oh, this operation's dicey, I don't have a good feeling about it. It's just that little feeling in the gut of your stomach. But you're like, wait, we can apply blah, 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 blah. So, for example, you could, if you think there's a high risk of a man overboard, if you put everyone into the seating floorboards of the Zodiac, they can't fall out from that position. And if you think, that might happen, they can't fall out from inside the Zodiac if there's suddenly, big weather. And also, a good mitigation that's often used is really rough. Let's only put 6 people in the Zodiac or 8 people in the Zodiac instead of a full load of 10.
Yeah.
Another one.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, another one that you can do is let the drivers all do a dry run to try out this channel each for themselves, or all go together and chat through it in a boat. You can put a safety boat in place. So this is a sort of a channel that we might not feel so happy about. Each driver gets accompanied by a safety boat so that should anything happen, the safety boat is there with extra crew, extra equipment to, let's say, if your fear here was a man overboard, you've got the sort of the backup. They've done the dry run. You've got fewer people in the boat. Maybe you put them all on the floorboards, and you've got a safety boat here to back up the whole operation in case anything did happen. Just while we're looking at this video here, just dealing with surf, dealing it absolutely straight on is the key. If you're ever dealing with surf, breaking waves, jacking up waves, even foamies, and as you know, on the shore break, hitting it absolutely straight on is the key.
Yeah, another thing you can do is just have Zodiacs really tightly paired. So this is Cape Lookout at Elephant Island, where it can be a real washing machine with breaking waves hitting the boats from the side. And so this is somewhere where having boats always in speaking distance of each other and prepped to tow. So they've got lines with carabiners on them already. That's another good mitigation if you're worried that a breakdown will lead to something serious happening straight away. But then you also have to ask yourself, if you're mitigating to that degree where you're fully expecting a disabled boat to get flipped, then maybe you shouldn't do that operation. But again, it's another mitigation. It's another way to stop someone getting hurt, and it's another way to defend yourself if somebody does get hurt.
So a mitigation that we sometimes use quite a lot on our fleet, we've got a marina deck. So you're loading right at the stern, like a lot of ships have, instead of a gangway. And when you've got the whole ship lurching and that little Zodiac at the back, there can be quite a lot of play. And if you feel like that play is really creating a lot of jerkiness and, people are sort of falling just by sort of as they're waiting to be seated down. So it's not horrendous. It's just gotten to the point where it's uncomfortable. It's not great. And we've applied a mitigation there where you instead of going side on like the normal procedure that you would for a gangway, sorry, the video is loading here, is we go bow on. And so this means now the driver is driving it on quite hard. So he's sort of being, part of the operation here. You've got a lot more crew on the marina deck. And now you can see the play of the water movement on the back of the ship. If the Zodiac was sideways, it would be like tipping quite a lot and kind of unstable, and maybe someone on the downward pontoon could even like spill out. So it's not horrendous, but it's just, you could see it would be really uncomfortable, jerky, wobbly if you were side on. But if you're bow on, the Zodiac at that angle has a whole lot more length to it, and it's much more securely connected. And then we've got more crew. That's part of the mitigation as well. More crew have come down and they're helping people get out one by one in this non-conventional. So, stirring up the whole SOP, changing the whole thing up to be like, wait, well, we wouldn't, this is like the third day in a row, we wouldn't have been able to operate. But we feel as though if we do bow on like this, we can actually manage this quite safely, where if it was side on, the risk of someone tipping out would be, too high.
Yeah, and there's several other mitigations we can do. So, for example, gathering all the staff on the bridge and actually having a talk about what these additional risks are and how we're going to manage them. And then that gets everyone on the same page. And as well as briefing the staff, briefing the passengers as well. So brief them on what's going to happen. This is also important so they have the opportunity to accept the risk. Like if they think every operation is going to be like the previous one and they go out and suddenly it's really rough, it doesn't feel as safe. It's good. They need to have been told that beforehand, so they have the ability to opt out. They need to, have an opportunity to accept that risk.
Sometimes.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, doing the dry runs, like we said, looking at alternate landing sites. Asking the captain to lift the anchor and rather drift if he's on board with working with you to sort of try and make it happen. Using ballast in high winds, that's quite a big one. Like, so you reduce the risk of the boat being flipped just by having ballast on the bow, like with a staff member.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So particularly the alternative landings. If ever I see a lot of ice around a landing site, I'm often looking for an alternative landing site with a different aspect. So if that landing site faces north, I'm looking for maybe like a point that will stick out beyond any ice, or a landing site that faces south or any other direction really. Whereas, if a northerly wind blocked that north-facing landing site, I know I have another one available. So it's always thinking about these things.
Yeah. All right. So now you've prepped, you've got your weather, your tides dialed, you've chatted to all the veterans on the team. You know what's going on, what big weather systems are at play. You've already spotted that there could be a few, issues. Okay, we've done a couple of mitigations, but what if the worst case scenario still happens? You get a big calving wave, or you get like, katabatic wind, or you get something sort of unexpected, and a situation just jacks up and spirals out of control, and now one of these worst case scenarios happens. Alex, what's your worst case scenario apart from being stuck on the photography boat?
Yeah, probably a flipped boat is, if we're staying on the water, like probably a flipped Zodiac is one of the worst things to happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're so lucky in our industry. This has happened so few times, and those very few incidences that have happened, we need to call upon, dissect, analyze, talk about, because it's a situation that none of us ever want to be in. And every time if a situation does happen, we all want to learn from it as much as we can. I'm going to share one little video clip with you now. This happened about 2 weeks ago in South Africa. Now, just to preface it, we wouldn't typically on our Zodiacs ever be launching out into big breaking waves, but this is a total normal practice in South Africa where you launch through the surf all the time. And the boats are specifically designed for this, and it's a different setup. But the mechanism of what you would have to do if you were facing a breaking wave and what these guys do is similar. And the premise is always that you must face the weather, face the breaking wave. If it's a shore break, if it's a wave out there, straight. And the energy will rush down both sides of the boat evenly and equally, and you will therefore stay straight. If you're a little bit skew, it'll all push on one side and it'll push you sideways, and that's when you can flip. And if you're side on, that's like textbook way how to flip. And if you're being chased by a wave, you can broach where you're actually now surfing, you're no longer in control, and the wave can catch up with you, or you can broach and dive your nose in. So surf is the most easy way to flip your boat. And if you ever were facing an unexpected wave for any reason, your best bet is to whip around and face it dead straight. Even if it breaks on your nose, that is the best way to handle a big wave, not to turn and run if it's close by and you don't have power. So here's a little video clip of an incident where he sort of punches this first foamy straight, exactly right, punches. He's in the mid-water now where they're not breaking, so he punches the next little set there straight correctly, not too much speed so you don't go flying over the other side. But he proceeds on to this next set of wave that's jacking up. He decides, oh, hell, I'm going to not actually punch that wave. Wrong decision. Now he's surfing, broach, flips. And being side on to a wave like that is textbook way to flip your boat. And having that wave catch up with you from behind is, you're never going to be in control. You're going to be surfing that wave, and it's not the angle that you want to be at all. So that was unfortunate. No one was severely injured. This unfortunately happens every month here, just because this is the practice of this is how boats have to go out to sea, basically. So you do end up getting quite a lot of experience with surf, and unfortunately a lot of stories with these sort of flips and stuff like that. So in any case, back to what could cause your boat to flip. And the big one is surf. Absolutely. Surf is so easy. And how are we going to get surf? Maybe you didn't realize you're in a shallow area and there's a calving, and that caused a big standing wave. Maybe the tide dropped and there was a shallow reef and there's some big swells came in. So there's all kinds of reasons why you might end up facing up to a wave that you weren't wanting to, but face up to it for sure when it comes to surf. And also surf also refers to that shore break wave that's dumping on us there in South Georgia and places like that. That's surf as well. That's the wave now just breaking on the beach. And it's different and in a way harder because you don't have your engines. You're at the mercy of your shore team. You can get surf when it's like a really strong current and the wind's going in the opposite direction. So that's looking at your tides and your charts and seeing, oh, this current's ripping in that direction, wind's ripping that direction. It just jacks up standing waves through that whole channel that could cause the surf. And then other things that could cause flipping, Alex, I know you've known of with wind itself.
Yeah, wind, like especially wind associated with swell, because then when the boat rides up on the swell, it exposes that flat bottom to the wind, and then the boat can act like a kite. And it's quite hard with a fully loaded boat, but I have seen a Zodiac with a big bow box and 2 fuel tanks and sandbags and a person on the front flip in strong winds. But for that to happen, it actually requires, when you have a bow box, I think the wind needs to be a fair bit above 60 before you have a risk of that boat flipping. But if you don't have a bow box, then it's much, much lower, that wind speed that's necessary. But yeah, for sure, if you've got swell, the risk is higher. And a good mitigation for that is, when the winds are that strong, when they're up above 60, the gusts are physical objects in the air that you can see. And so as you see them coming, you can stop and turn around and just face into them with the engine. And then the gust will never lift the engine out of the water. So that's a good mitigation there. And just going back to the surf thing, usually it's thought that if you have a wave height that's equivalent to the width of your boat, that's enough to flip it. But I have seen with Zodiacs that if the water's very shallow and the Zodiac touches the bottom, even a small wave can flip it. So if you're side on to a small wave and you're on a long, low beach, I saw this happen at Cap Lee once, then the speed tube catches the bottom and suddenly the Zodiac's thrown up in the air.
So I'm going to just show a quick video of the more ideal way to face up to a wave, and that's absolutely dead straight, and then you must tap off on the top of that wave. You mustn't, the tendency, if it's your first time, is to try and get there before it breaks, and drivers like whiz right up to it, and then if they're so happy, obviously they're over the moon that they got to the wave before the wave broke, and that's great because it's a lot less impact on the boat to get it before it breaks. But then they forget to tap off on their speed, and then they go flying off on the other side, and that's when you can have man overboards and injuries on the boat itself. So punching that wave straight, whether it's broken, about to break, or after it's hasn't broken at all yet, punching it dead straight. But then also if it hasn't broken yet, or if it's a peaking wave, tap right off on the top of it so that you don't crash land off down the other side. So now let's just talk for a minute about your boat's now flipped. Okay, it's a worst case scenario. You got to gather your wits about you and your thoughts, and possibly you need to escape from underneath the flip boat, possibly passengers need to escape from underneath the flip boats. I just want to talk about the mechanics of that for a minute, the possible training that is out there as well. And we're very fortunate of one flip boat incident that has happened in our industry a few years ago, and the staff were so generous to share their personal experiences with us at the IATO Field Staff Conference. And one thing that really I never forgot was one of the staff members who was trapped underneath the boat. It's quite a scary idea to think about swimming under to get out, but we've done this practice in all the life jackets, in big inflatable passenger life jackets and everything. And if you hold the pontoon and you push yourself and you get out quite easily, it's totally doable no matter how floaty or buoyant your life jacket is. But it's worth trying that in practice one day if you get the opportunity, because when faced with the situation, you're under the boat, it's very scary to try and think you need to swim out from underneath that boat, but you do obviously need to. But the staff member concerned shared with the group that all the accessories, everyone's bag clipped on with the carabiner, the fuel line, all the stuff was dangling like a curtain. So to get out from underneath the pontoon was extra challenging because all the stuff was everywhere and you could easily get snagged in it. And remember, if your boat flipped, it's probably there's surf around, and it's probably a really messy, churning, confusing, horrible situation as well. It's not just all like textbook when you out at sea and you get to practice. So getting to practice is gold, in the specific life jackets that you wear is gold. And then trimming your boat up if you're in a sort of scenario, I mean, always not having extra crap dangling off your Zodiac's great, but if you think, these conditions are quite on the edge now, also just having less stuff dangling around on your Zodiac is going to be a good call in the first place.
Yeah, like latching down your bow box lid. I see a lot of staff not doing that because if you're not flipping the boat, it's not useful to do it. But I've had a Zodiac flip on what we thought was a flat calm day. And yeah, there were fuel tanks and stuff just floating everywhere. So I just always latch everything down and connect everything up. Because if afterwards the question is, why did it all come out the bow box? And you're like, well, I didn't connect it because I didn't think it was necessary. Again, it's like, it's not a very good answer.
Yeah. So now your boat's flipped, you've escaped from underneath the boat. Probably your radio, it's not going to be working functionally. So generally in an emergency, it's like call it in. But this might, in a flip boat, that might not be the priority because, you might stand there smacking your radio looking for what's that button again that does the me, So maybe, radio and calling it in might not happen. But at this point in time, again, remember, there's the boat flip for a reason that you might not quite be aware of at that moment. But people tend to want to cling onto the boat. They feel safe, like, let's stay with the boat. But the boat is going to be likely more harmful place for you to stick onto and cling onto, because if it's likely that it's in surf, that boat's going to now go maybe wash over rocks, wash up to the beach, where you as a solo person or you with your people moving away from the boat and staying with each other, you can swim out of a danger zone, but the boat will drag you potentially into a danger zone. So getting people, making sure you got everyone out from under and then clinging onto each other and moving away from the flipped boats is possibly something you need to really think about. Every situation is different. And then oftentimes with training and stuff, a lot of our academies and such will, and we've trained as well for righting a flipped boat. But in reality, those sorts of trainings is more thinking of when you out on your private boat out in the middle of nowhere and you're alone, and you're going to make a better shelter out of a boat that's been now righted than an upturned boat. But with us, we're always in a fleet, so it's quite it's very easy to injure people with righting a flipped boat. So I think in reality, most people wouldn't actually then take the trouble to try and with humans right a flipped boat. You're more likely just to injure yourself further, and you can do it with Zodiacs or with the crane or tow it back upside down or whatever.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. Like both times I've been involved with the flip boat, we just did it with the crane and towed it back upside down. It's not like you're ever going to start the engine until you've got it up on deck and you've been able to pour the salt water out of the cylinders. So yeah, I would almost never see a scenario where you would want to right a flipped boat unless maybe you're like 10 miles from the ship and it couldn't reposition. And even then I might consider just abandoning the boat rather than flipping it. I think you're right that it's too much of a risk of hurting someone.
Yeah. Or if you're like, way open water, which is not really our scenario in our industry, you could sit on top of a upturned boat and, like sort of wait. But, that's not our scenario for our industry. That's more talking about boating in the world in general, a kind of scenario. And then something worth mentioning as well is, pollution. So gathering up, after everyone's been rescued and safe, gathering up, thinking about the oil spill potential of your little fuel tank and all the little stuff that might have drifted everywhere. But then the big, most helpful thing to do, an important thing to do, let's say, after a big incident like this is reporting and debriefing. And because I've been involved in so much report writing and of my own and amongst the team and looking at reports of other incidences, it's always there in my mind when things are happening and things are going down. I'm looking at the timeline and I'm starting to make that chronological picture of the report writing, because you actually can't, afterwards, you are going to be asked a million kabillion questions, and only the more times you write reports, the more you start to have that analytical mind about the report writing. So the report writing is something that I always say we do as a team. So like, let's say if I was one of the primary people involved, I might write the whole report as I remembered it and then sit with the whole team, and you'll always find other people in the team remembered other things. Oh yeah, I forgot that happened at that moment. And then everyone adds in their little 2 cents. The report writing is a little bit therapeutic apart from anything else, but it's what is going to be the official account of what happened and what you did and why and who did what and when and what. And so it's really important that everyone, it's not a blame game. It's just really important that everyone agrees as to the official account of what happened and all the information and facts went in there, because it's actually valuable to all of us in the whole industry. If you have a major incident, we all want to read every single thing that happened there, because there's so few of these for us to tap into. And then the reporting as a team also acts as quite a handy, like a debrief, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I was so scared about such happening. And that person's like, yeah, I also thought that was going to happen. Thank goodness that didn't happen, but blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of, like I said, it's therapeutic and acts as a debrief. And don't forget as well, you may have to debrief with the passengers. And this, might be a discussion with the head office or whatever, but having a debrief with the passengers is also really important. You can't just let major incidences sort of fall by the wayside as though they never happened. It's really important that passengers also understand what happened in big incidences like that as well. And yeah, so it's quite a hard one, but it's really can be so helpful to you, not just to the head office and the company and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a very fine line to tread, debriefing with the guests, because on the one hand, you want to reassure them that what happened kind of was okay, but and that you're not to blame for something terrible happening. But at the same time, they shouldn't feel worried that it's going to happen again. And I think that therapeutic nature of debriefing you mentioned shouldn't be underestimated, because whether we like it or not, like, people are we are emotional beings. And so giving people an opportunity to talk about it and process their emotions a bit can really help with, moving on from that and being able to get on with the trip.
Yeah. Funny little story, but I had an accident hiking with a very dear friend of mine last year, and I wrote a whole report on it for no one and nothing and no one, but for myself, because I just have known how much I like analyzing and going sort of dissecting it, and how helpful it is to me, that report writing, to sort of make sense of it and just go review what happened and be like, okay, I just found it's ended up being very helpful to me in other parts of my life too.
Yeah. So should we move on to maybe another worst case scenario, which is maybe like somebody falling out of the boat?
Yeah. So what are the main causes of man overboard or woman overboard? Again, surf, like we alluded to before, definitely that idea that you go after the other side of the wave. That's actually where we've had mobs, is on the other side of the wave, people falling out the boat because it crash landed on the other side of the wave. So here. Yeah, at this moment here, now is when people fall out, or people also been injured on the bow box and stuff like that. Then we've got another cause here.
Yeah, so this is a difficult gangway. So you see, obviously, we're not going to actually try and land anyone with the gangway like this. But the principle is, when it gets rough at the gangway, either there's a big swell or the ship's rolling on the swell, and there's a lot of movement between the gangway and the ship, then obviously that's going to be a classic opportunity for someone to fall when either getting from gangway to Zodiac or Zodiac to gangway.
So a couple of years ago, we had two close by. You know how it is. You can go for years and not have any man overboards, and then we had two kind of quite close to each other, two incidents within a few months apart, and it really got me thinking. You know how it is, chatting with all the staff, the bar side, and then all the stories come out, and it really got me thinking about the mobs. So I did a few years ago. I said on Boat People, I was going to do a little mob analysis, and quite a few people sent me their mob stories, and I had a specific questionnaire, so it was great. Again, we actually don't have too many to draw on, but I did this analysis of man overboards, all the ones that I could find. And it was kind of interesting. I don't know how big of a screen you're reading from, but this was the mob analysis that I did. So it was something like 12 mobs or something like that. And I want to just share with you the outcome of that. So in 45% of the cases, there was surf involved. So surf was a key factor in the man overboards. In 70, was the driver experienced or inexperienced? Mostly experienced. 72% of them were experienced drivers where the man overboard happened. How many mobs? 1, 2, or 3, an average of 1.7, so it's 1 or 2, so that whatever triggered the mob was often more than one person who fell out. Surf in 45% of the cases. Did they call man overboard on the radio? So 72% of the drivers were very experienced, and yet only 50% of the time did they call the man overboard on the radio. Did the person cling onto the boat when they fell out? Yes, in 65% of the time they clung, they fell out and they clung. And in a lot of these situations, they'd flipped over and they were like clinging now with their hands over there and their like head in the water. And they just, the instinct to like hold on was there. And so the people were clinging onto the boat. Now imagine the boat's in a precarious situation. It actually might need to, the reason why the person fell out is there's still this danger around, and you've got now a person clinging on. So that was kind of interesting. Was the life jacket worn normally? 90% of the time the life jacket was worn normally. Did it inflate normally? Most of the time it inflated normally, sometimes a bit slow. So about a third of the time it didn't inflate normally. Who was involved in the recovery? This was just more out of interest. So the primary driver of the boat where the mob happened was usually involved in the recovery. And then sometimes the new Zodiac was involved. Were there assistants in every incident that I knew about? There wasn't a solo rescuer. So that's just like a lucky circumstance. You could still be a solo rescuer. And what stopped the engine? So the driver stopped the engine 45% of the time, and the kill cord stopped the engine 27% of the time. Meaning that the driver, just the experienced driver, the more likely, most of them experienced driver, just lunged to help the person without even wait, stop, turn off the engine. They just, person fell out, they lunged. So it's interesting because so few of us have been in those situations, and you know how it's like you feel like you never really know how you're going to react in a sort of extreme situation. And a lot of experienced drivers just lunged to help the person without stopping the engine. So that was kind of interesting figure there. Defective equipment, no, not really. Was the injured? Incidentally, everyone who was injured because they clung. So their arm got pulled or stretched or dislocated or whatever. The injuries were related to the clinging. So the takeaway that I took from this certainly was to emphasize to people, when we do our little drill with the passengers, emphasize to people not to cling onto the boat. And then the other one was you got to call it in on the radio. Some of these stories just turned into a complete cluster, like comedy of errors. Things go from bad to worse because the driver lunged to help. In some incidences, the driver ended up in the water with the person trying to help, and they hadn't called it on the radio. Now, you don't always immediately know what caused that person to fall out the boat, but one should assume that it's not normal. There was one incident where the person fainted and fell in, just randomly, but there's a reason the person fell in, and you may or may not be, often, let's say it's really choppy or confused seas or surf. You mustn't be lingering now in that surf and trying to rescue the mob. Ideally, you might have to even leave that mob behind and get out of there, because otherwise you're going to put the whole boat potentially in danger. If you now faffing around, you've left the engine, you're now faffing around trying to pull someone back in the boat, and you're in a channel with a confused sea, with surf jacking up, you could now take that mob and turn it into a flipped boat. So it's a hard idea, but the takeaway from looking at all these mobs for me was absolutely, the choice might have to be, you need to discourage people from clinging on, and you may need to leave that person behind in that channel that caused that flip, and you may need to carry on going and get out of that channel. That person has a life jacket, but you shouldn't endanger the whole boat just because you're pretty useless as a driver if you're trying to pull a mob out the water, and you can't do that in a sort of bad set of water. So calling on the radio, just like in a first aid emergency, like stop, wait, think, act, call on the radio, guys, I've got a man overboard, assess the danger, and then you can make the analysis of whether it's it's totally fine, there's nothing going on here, I can just try and pull this person out the water now, how embarrassing, they're going to buy drinks for everyone at the bar tonight. Or okay, we're in a situation here where we could have more mobs, or the whole boat could flip if I just linger around here. I actually need to move on. So it was good doing the analysis. We don't have too many to draw from, although within every fleet and group of people there'll be an incident or two. It's certainly more common than flipping, but it's great to try and learn from these as much as possible. And then Alex, you want to add anything there before I do the next bit on the...
Yeah, so, these people, like, the engine stopping because they're just lunging for this person in the water. I've seen somebody doing a man overboard drill, pulling an actual person out of the water. They didn't have the kill cord on, and same thing, they just left the engine to go and get them, but left the engine in gear. And so they're trying to pull them out of the water, but the Zodiac's at the same time running this person down. So that, they're towing them through the water, trying to pull them out. And so what's really important is to actually practice this. So make some of it muscle memory so that you do it right automatically. If you've done 100 man overboards where you've remembered to take the boat out of gear and switch it off before you go and get that person, then you'll do it automatically when it comes to the real thing. Because when the real thing happens, you're going to be really stressed. It's unlikely it's going to be like a calm, nice day. You're going to be so stressed, and you want it to just happen automatically. So train and practice as much as you can.
So unsurprisingly, we had almost as many staff mobs. Man, did I get some comedy bloopers sent to me on the staff mobs. And you know what it's like. It's always the same story. We take so much care of the passengers, and then you drop off the staff member at the gangway, but it's like a 2-foot gap between the Zodiac and the gangway. You're like, go now! There's a mob. And, dropping someone from boat to boat, there's a mob. Someone standing on the bow box, and they hadn't clipped it down, and they stand too far forward, and the bow box lid flips up, and they're like, oh, should I smash my head on the gangway or the boat? Nope, man overboard. So the staff one, as unsurprisingly, there's been some pretty sort of silly staff ones, but then also there've been some pretty serious staff ones where people fell over the transom with the wave, and various instances like that. So I won't go into these in super detail, but it's just to be reminded that we need to take as much care of ourselves and each other as we do with passengers, because these are not only humble pie and then you over on a drink at the bar, but in some cases they really can be quite serious, and people didn't want to drive again after this, or they left the industry as well. So we don't ever need those racking up in our industry. Okay, so Alex, this is Alex being very naughty here with his expedition team, and should I just play it?
Yeah, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's the whale. Oh! 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 Fast!
So yeah, this is an example of practicing a lot and making sure you are ready. Like my team that season were all ready to pick up an MOB because they knew that at least once a trip they'd have to pick me up on the way back from a landing site. But what's what's good to see about that is, you know, when you do like say RWA powerboat level 2, they teach you this like set way of picking up the man overboard. And so, you know, like first thing you're going to turn towards the MOB. You saw there, by the time people really kind of clocked that I was gone, we were quite a long way away already. You know, you're doing 20 knots. It only has to be 5 seconds. You're quite a long way behind. And, you know, this idea of approaching from downwind is actually, I think, quite a good one because it really helps you to control the boat. But you don't need to get like hung up on these ideas of like, you have to do the classic Henderson turn or something. I just choose a spot that I want to go to near that MOB to pick them up from, and I just drive straight there. Like our Zodiac's turn on a sixpence. So you just, you know, someone falls in, stop, turn around, go back. And the only thing you really have to think about, as you were saying, Pam, is it safe to pick them up there? Like maybe they're in breaking waves amongst rocks, in which case don't. But I don't think you have to think too much about the conditions otherwise. One thing I might think about is if there's a lot of wind-driven waves, I would approach from downwind because I would worry about it, like, you know, the Zodiac getting pushed on top of them as it falls off a wave and hitting them in the head. But yeah, the classic theory doesn't always apply to actually going to go and collect a man overboard.
And the other thing that happens is, like, even if it's a staff boat, you'll go approach them and you'll have all 4 staff leaning over the pontoon, all on the same side, and like forgetting to be like, oh, hang on, you know. So can make a situation go from bad to worse. So the big thing here is, like Alex said, is building up your muscle memory of your protocols and practicing. You have to practice every way possible for yourself. If there's 4 rescuers, if there's 3 rescuers, if there's 2 rescuers, if you're a solo rescuer, if it's a really heavy person, if it's a person wearing no life jacket, if it's a person wearing a big inflated one in the front, if it's a person wearing a normal PFD, if it's a massive overweight person, if it's an unconscious person. So trying all the different ways of pulling a mob out for yourself will give you that confidence to, if you ever are pulling someone out, to be like, I know exactly where I'm going to grab them, how, and where I personally can leverage my strength, like my lack of strength, what I can leverage, what equipment I can leverage. And I'm confident that, you know, if it's me and one other staff member, we can do this. I know my techniques. So here we go. Couple of vids for you.
Yeah, so this is self-rescue, so actually getting yourself out of the water. So first of all, we're just looking here at what you use, and it's really helpful to use this cavitation plate just here at the bottom of an engine as a step. And you can see you just grab onto the transom, stand on that step, and it's not that hard to climb out. It's a lot harder in an inflatable life jacket, but it's still possible. And just remember, if I was doing that, I'd reach over the transom and pull the kill cord out before I did this, just to be certain. And then when it comes to pulling people out, there's so many ways to do it. So this is 2 people pulling someone out facing the boat. And you notice they do the little dunk there. So push them down, and their buoyancy gives you a little bit of a helpful start on pulling them out. So that can work well for some people, is to pull them out facing the boat.
And that doesn't work at all with a big inflated life jacket on the front, if you'll see.
No, so facing away, you can see the same thing. We give a dunk and pull. And if you just try this with a lot of different people, you'll find some people actually fold over the sponson a lot better facing away. So this person looks really stiff. And I think that's just because he's very fit. He has a very strong core. But a lot of people kind of fold nicely over the sponson in this method. But I think we have a video. Also, sorry, go on.
Yeah, like, you know, when you practice this so much times amongst the staff, it can get a bit casual in a way. But don't forget, if you were doing this to a passenger and you're going to dunk them down first, you really need to talk them through the whole process. Okay, ma'am. Okay, so we're going to do this now. We're going to push you down a little bit. And 1, 2, 3, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think this one is someone being pulled out, with an inflatable life jacket, which is harder. There's less to hold on to, and it hurts them a lot more. It's a lot less comfortable. This person's doing a very good job of wearing a lot of waterlogged clothes and doing absolutely nothing to help. And so you can see this is kind of more realistic what it's going to look like trying to pull someone out. bearing in mind also, this is like, you know, a slim young guy who doesn't weigh very much. You can see it's a struggle.
And once a life jacket like that is inflated, it's very hard. There's a lot of tension on the buckle. It's very hard to take it off if you were trying to go, you know, go in that direction, be like, oh, let's take this off. It's making it really hard to pull them out. So actually deflating it with the little straw goodie, the oral inflation thing, deflating it there is probably a better way to alleviate that awkwardness of that inflated life jacket.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, what have we got next? Okay, this is rolling someone out. So sometimes maybe, you know, you don't want to have to pull someone up vertically. You might be able to spread their weight across more people by rolling them in. So like grab a leg and pull it over the sponson and roll them in. That can work quite nicely, you can see. And then you can also try to roll them in if you wanted with like a rope or a line. It's not super effective and it can hurt them a lot. But what it does is it, you know, the side of that sponson is overhanging at the bottom and you're always fighting that overhang when you pull them in. But with the rope line like this, it automatically pulls them out from under that overhang first. So in some ways it can make it easier. But again, I would try all the other methods before I got to this, because I think just the chance of tangling someone up or getting that rope around their neck or just like it pinching them so hard it really hurts is quite high. But sorry, go on.
I was going to say the reminder is so good though to just use what you have at your disposal. So you always have lines and strapping or webbing for the lifting straps. And if the person's a little bit able, you can sling that as a step. So using your lifting strap or this rope and just hanging it like sort of a foot below the water. And if they're not completely unable, then they can use it as a step to help you pull them in as well.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I know some drivers who will carry like a strop, just a line with a carabiner at each end, which they'll just leave hanging over the side of the boat to use as a step. And that can also be very valuable if you don't want to use the transom. If you're in rough weather, that transom's a very dangerous place to be. So getting someone in over the side instead of the back can be a good thing to do. This video here is a totally different technique. So here you've got one person holding the feet, and then you've got two people giving the seaman's grip. And this is worth trying because sometimes it can be difficult, but then sometimes it can be by far the easiest technique. Some people swear that this is the easiest way for the people in the boat and the least painful for the victim as well. It's a very neat, easy, comfortable way to come back into the boat. So it's definitely one that's worth experimenting with. And it doesn't matter whether they're in a PFD or an inflatable life jacket either.
Yeah. So something that is kind of like a worst case man overboard scenario is when you've got a single rescuer and an unhelpful, unconscious or hypothermic or just unable to help you man overboard in the water. Because we work a lot in the tropics as well, like a lot of fleets, we have a lot more people in the water a lot of the time. And so it's something we have to sort of deal with a lot more, I guess. And so you do get, for a single rescuer, and if there is a safety boat or a snorkel safety boat or any safety boat like in the situations we've described, I would always put one of these man overboard nets on board the boat. And these exist in your lifeboats as well. There's a couple of main brands. There's the Dacon Rescue Frame. There's a Jason's Cradle. These exist in your lifeboats. And we've in the past just, tapped into those. But for me, they're like a big grid in a way. And I always feel like to be using them sort of regularly, they very easily could injure someone's limb or digit that was sticking out the wrong hole. So we actually have had these designed and made here. And you can connect with me if you want to get hold of this particular net I'm going to show you. It's just basically made out of shade cloth. And as a single rescuer with me being quite small and quite a heavy person in the water, it's really, really, really amazing how it's sort of a net like this is very effective. And so you're not using so much strength, you're just using the net itself and then leveraging your own weight to pull them in, a bit like a seesaw. So there's hooks on the other side, like grab handles, various grab handles on the other side. Scoop the person in, and then you basically just need to roll them into the boats with one of the various grab handles that are here.
Yeah, this is another technique which overcomes the overhang problem as well. It rolls you up the overhang so easily you don't rub against it.
Yeah, and although this isn't a great example of it, lights rescue and a heavy victim, I could pull out quite a heavy person on my own with this technique, so it is pretty good. And then this as well, you can have it made with like a little step as well, so the actual rescuer, if you were in the water or staff member, whatever, can also get out using that little step. So that's quite a good one. If you are interested in getting hold of some of those, you can let me know. All right, so the last, we've discussed flipped boats, which is obviously horrendous, and may we never ever be in those scenarios. Man overboard is something you might come across if you have a long career, and it's something you should really, chat a lot about and train for, practice all the different techniques. But obviously, first prize is just to avoid. And if you get hit, to conquer it smoothly so that your report comes out like textbook. We unlucky, we got a mob, we delivered it well. But then something that's far more everyday likely that happens with us is dealing with shore break and incidents and accidents around shore break.
Yeah, I think this is the most common, and I'm sad we can't share everything. Like Pam and I had a long discussion before this with a lot of embarrassing and terrifying stories and videos that we felt we couldn't share here. But we've got a few things that we can share. But this really is somewhere where I think you're most likely to have an incident.
Okay, so here is a classic shore break procedure, and this really isn't shore break. This is like an absolute doddle of shore break, of course. But this is the stern landing. This is the technique where the driver reverses in. The other technique you're familiar with is when the team is standing deeper and they punch the nose around and they spin the boat for you. And that just depends on the depth of water and the team you've got and where the actual breaking waves are. In this case, it's just so mild. It's a little doddle like of a wave right on the beach. But I'm a big fan, so this is Jason's Harbour. I'm a big fan of using this and getting into the routine and practice of using these things, even when it's a doddle, because...
We hope so.
Sorry. Even when it's a doddle, because if a big wave were to come out of nowhere because there was a calving just on the other side of the bay, you're already facing the right direction. You're already facing out to sea, facing the waves. And also, if you're facing the other way around, just having that little energy, small wave slapping on the transom, the boat's just jerking unnecessarily, more movement, more jerking. Where if it's facing this small little doddle of a wave, it's a whole lot smoother in the first place. But third of all, it's just getting the team into good habits, good practices, so that the first time you're using this is not at Gold Harbour, St Andrews Bay, and Salisbury Plain. You're just using this on the regular. The drivers are good at reversing in. They know the tiller's going to pull them in all different directions. The team in the water knows their positions and where they want to be. The passengers are adept at standing in two rows. One row is going to that side, one row is going to that side, avoiding the engine. Because when you do suddenly have big energy, that engine's like, pushing back and forth. And that's really, I think, a top injury potential is someone getting caught behind the boat or next to the boat while it's moving vigorously. So let me keep playing, sorry. So getting into good practice when conditions are mild, I think is a very good habit in the first place.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. Again, it's just building the muscle memory and a muscle memory as a team as well, like knowing who's confident. And if somebody's not done a stern landing before, it's much better that they do it the previous trip somewhere calm than the first time being in extremis at Gold Harbour or whatever, as you say. It never hurts to just be well practiced before you do something for real the first time. But at the same time, there's no substitute for actually doing it in rough conditions, because of course you can get away with things in these calm conditions that you couldn't get away with in rough conditions. And so, you practice what you can here and make sure you guide people well. But you never properly start learning until you actually do it in more serious wave and wind and swell conditions.
Yeah, and back to the mitigation. Let's say you got your 4 best drivers, and they're almost always the drivers. And now suddenly you're dealing with a really big shore break, and you realize that you actually need a really strong shore team that's experienced at holding the boat directly into the waves, strong to hold it, maybe the taller people at the front if it's steep at the front. And so you might actually put your not best drivers on the driving role, because maybe that's not where the challenge is, and you might prioritize the experienced people dealing with shore break to hold the boat.
Yes, yeah, that's a really effective thing to do. And even going beyond that, just not putting your strongest drivers in all the time and pigeonholing them. So sometimes what I'll do is deliberately put the weakest drivers in whenever it's calm, to build them into a strong driver. Otherwise, they'll never get good enough to do these conditions. So this is a slightly more energetic beach. This is Brown Bluff. And so you can see when normal conditions, it's fine. But then when you get caught out by some bigger waves, you can't really be loading and unloading people here. So you see here, we've got 4 people in the water. So we adjusted our SOP this day. As soon as we saw there was some movement on the beach, we cancelled kayaking and put the whole kayak team on the beach to help hold the boat and help guide people. What's very difficult, I think, with these conditions is when you get that boat into the beach, you're in a rush to get everyone out as fast as you can. So you're being efficient and fast. And it's a really noisy situation that can be confusing. So when a big set comes in like this, it can be quite hard to stop that disembarkation or embarkation process. So we've just managed it here. The driver's a good person to manage this. They see those waves coming in, and they can just grab those guests who are getting out, maybe by the hood of their jacket, and just hold them in the boat. Just make sure no one's on the beach. And you do need to have some people. We see here we've got 2 people holding the bow of the Zodiac and 2 people holding the stern. And they're there to help the guests as they get out of the boat. But you need more people up the beach. So there's some more people off camera here who are there to help the guests on the beach. But once those big waves get going, those 2 people at the back, they've just got to try to help hold that boat square to the waves. And then once it calms down, you can start letting the guests in or out again. Another thing we've done when we've been caught out by a big set coming, and maybe there's someone trying to get into the boat and they are really struggling. Maybe they're not very tall. The consequence of that big wave hitting the boat while they're still trying to get in, and maybe if they're the kind of person who's struggling to get in quickly, they're also not going to be able to run up the beach. You just have to start weighing up what's the best thing for them, because more than once I've seen people hit by the back of a boat surging up the beach and knocked down. And I've also seen people sucked by the water down the beach and under the transom of a boat in situations even rougher than this, which is, of course, very dangerous. So what we have done in those situations, when you see that big set coming and you've got someone who's not very able, and the truck can't get in the boat, is we've grabbed them by the ankles and just thrown their legs in the air and just flip them into the boat. So just give them a somersault into the boat, because that's better than them still being on their feet when that set hits. So again, however much you mitigate, you have to ask yourself whether it's worth it. Like if every landing was like the one we saw just there, that would not be worth it, because the chance of an accident is too high. But if just that's happening a couple of times in the landing, you can accept that. And it's also, that's another good reason to have light loaded boats. If you've only got 6 or 8 people, it's easier for that team to hold the boat on the beach. And even though you have to do far more landings, each one is quicker. So you can squeeze them into shorter gaps between the big sets as well. So those are the good mitigations for heavy shore breaks.
And then more mitigations, conditions like that, those conditions are something you might be dealing with every single day on an Antarctic voyage. And it might be, totally normal, everyone's adept, everyone's got it down and dialed, and you can run that very, very, very safely. Beginning of the season, sometimes with everyone's a little bit, rusty since last year. You don't have all your equipment in the right place at the right time, and you can really have those same conditions cause horrible injuries and accidents for, the exact same conditions can result in a whole different sort of outcome. So amongst all those mitigations, if you're going to go in those big sort of, surgy beach conditions with the occasional bigger one that's breaking and then chunks of ice on the beach, what is your staff wearing? Like I would just, if I was wearing neoprene chest waders, I would just float away if I was the person in the front of the boat. So I would want to be, in those thinner, like not neon, that plastic kind of chest waders. Someone else might be, they're happy with a full hedge-toed dry suit because you've got potential of waves breaking over the head. You don't want your staff starting to get hypothermic, big chunks of ice, rubbing against their legs. So having everyone properly prepared and the proper gear and in the right place. And then you need extra staff now at the back of the boat, just managing the humans. Okay, 4 of you going to that side, 4 of you going to that side. Wait. Okay, go now. The people not all holding 5 different items of a camera and a pole and a this and a that and another. Everything's in the backpack. Sometimes you even have a staff member who just brings all the backpacks. So the passengers just need to go, walk down, get in. And you've seen operations, we've all been there, like in the latter half of the season where you've got the system so beautifully dialed, you barely even need a staff meeting, and everyone just knows their place, they know how to run these marginal conditions. And then I would say you've done all those mitigations, even without thinking you've done them, but you've done all those mitigations and you run this marginal conditions really safely. And like I said, you could equally have a situation or a team where it's like, why are you even operating in those conditions? Of course, people get injured, So the mitigations really, it's not just box ticking. Can be so, so genuinely like allow you to operate.
Yeah, and it's not just the team that need to be experienced, but actually the passengers as well. So, if you're going on a South Georgia trip, trying to do stern landings on your days in the Falklands first. So all the passengers have tried a stern landing in easier conditions. And Saunders is a great place for this because you often need to do it anyway, but it's a nice, easy, sandy beach and it's often not too harsh in there. So yeah, getting the passengers good at it as well is also really important. Mm-hmm. And I think my top tip for what to wear in those conditions is I wear a full dry suit and then the big neoprene waders as well, because they're like armor for the legs. So when you get the ice hitting you, and it's too cold in those kayak dry suits, like you need the warmth of the neoprene. But then I think it's really important to wear a waterproof over the top of the waders, and that stops water pouring inside them. Otherwise, you're going to have to get tipped upside down a few times during the landing to empty it out. And then a PFD done up as tight as possible, just to stop water filling those waders. And I find that's like pretty effective. And I can swim like that as well. Like I've been carried offshore and been able to swim around pretty safely dressed like that.
Yeah. And getting to practice in the different roles, like you'll find that, I mean, I've even often referred to using taller, stronger people at the front, but myself not being necessarily a taller, stronger person, I can do the front, the bow of the Zodiac because I've done it so much for so many years in the tropics, and I'm really, really familiar with the effect that wave's going to have. So I'm not worried about sort of washing around when the wave breaks, because I know the minute you find your feet again, that you're able to just plant your feet in and hold the boat. It takes, because sometimes the smallest amount of just holding it straight, that changes the whole scenario. The back washes straight. If you just get that front held straight, it doesn't actually in the end necessarily need the biggest, strongest people. It just needs sometimes the skill and the practice that you've done it before. So like I said, rotating the staff through different roles and not pigeonholing people is also just generally helpful. Everyone should be good at everything after a couple of trips. Lauren popped up a good little discussion topic there in the chat box, and it's something we've slightly alluded to, but is those shallow offshore reefs and because Brown Bluff video came up, it's a classic place where people are coming and going, going. Oh, you didn't realize the tide's dropping, and now it's significantly dropped, and half the landing is excluded because if it's not blocked off by ice, it's blocked off by reef. Worse than that, and this happens here at Brown Bluff, it's in a way can be quite open to swells from the whole Antarctic Sound. And as the tides, there's not breaking waves at the high tide, but as the tide lowers and lowers and lowers, suddenly there are breaking waves on those reefs. So knowing your tides, knowing your charts is hugely valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think, yeah. And a lot of it as well comes from familiarity. I think sometimes it's hard to predict when this is going to happen just from the chart, but you just do the best you can, don't you? So, once you know the swell condition and you know the bottom conditions. But yeah, that's certainly something you need to be aware of.
Yeah. So, guys, if there's any questions, I think. There was one
here. Yeah, is it worthwhile to get the Windy Pro account?
I just got it actually recently. So the difference was you can see all the models. So let's say there's a bunch of squiggles, and most of them say the wind's going to be like such and such, going to be 5-10 knots. But then there's one model that says, oh, the wind's actually going to be 20 knots. So okay, and then it broke it down. So instead of 3-hour intervals, it got 1-hour interval. So I'm a bit of a sucker for these apps and stuff. So I just got the Pro model, but I would probably say no. I wouldn't say it's completely worthwhile when you've got the free version and you've got the red Windy. I think it's enough. It wasn't as much of a bigger picture of information I was getting. But it's the clickbait, all those little red buttons. Oh, you can only see this if you got the Pro account. So I can't help it. I'm such a sucker.
It's definitely worth with Windy looking at it all the time and looking at everything on there. Like just, even when the conditions are good, just always thinking about like, how did it actually compare to what Windy said would happen? And how, because I think on the free account, you can still compare 2 models and just compare them because, it can tell you something if those models are in strong agreement or strong disagreement. That can give you an idea of what you need to think about as well. And also noticing things like I find with Windy, with the, was it ECWMF model, whatever it is, I know I need to move that system like around 80 nautical miles inland on the peninsula to give me something that, matches what I feel when I'm there. Or setting it to gusts instead of to just standard wind. That's another thing I find which like makes it feel more realistic. So if you're looking at that all the time, it's amazing how much like additional information you can get out of it.
Yeah. And I mean, we said at the beginning, but looking at the bigger picture of the bigger weather in the area, that there's a big low pressure over there, and then knowing your chart of which way the bay is facing, and there's a mountain range over there. I mean, you really can. I find spot forecasts can be a bit dangerous, and you should always back it up with knowing what's on the synoptic chart, what systems are around, coupled with the topography of the bay that you're in. And if it wasn't meant to be any weather at all today, and you feel that like blowing breeze on your cheek, and you're like, whoa, what's happening here? What's going on here? You kind of just can know for yourself what you might expect to happen in spite of the fact that the spot forecast said nothing was going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's like South Georgia is a classic place for that, where, the wind's hammering on the west side of the island and it's calm where you are. Like you're mentally ready for the catabatics to start blowing. There's a lot of energy just generating up in the mountains. But even just knowing, again, for the coroner's report, I'm always thinking like, what forecast was I faced with when I went out in 40 knots of wind? I went out knowing that it was forecast to drop to nothing within the next 3 hours, say. So it's a reasonable decision to go out in marginal conditions. But if it's forecast to stay the same or get worse, that then becomes an indefensible decision.
Yeah. So guys, thanks so much. It's been quite a long seminar
Yeah.
session. Yeah, I think just to wrap up, you can never should never cut time out of doing the observations and checking and just feeling empowered to make those decisions for yourself and back yourself and train as much as you can to inform yourself as much as you can to feel empowered to always make those good decisions for yourself that you'll be happy to back up your decisions afterwards.
Yeah. So I'm just going to finish with a little bit of housekeeping. So the apps that Pam has mentioned, we will be putting out a list of those afterwards. So Lauren will put that up for us. And also, we just want to plug the next presentation, which is next Tuesday. So that's a week today. And that is Private Guiding, the Good, the Bad, and the Insane, with Rob McCallan and Kelvin Murray in conversation with Graham Charles. So I don't know which one of them is good, which is bad, and which is insane, but I guess we'll find out next week.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks, Alex and Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.